He announced to the world that Muammar Gaddafi has been killed on the hands of the revolutionaries.
He called himself King of Kings. Look on his works, ye mighty, and despair. A turning point for Libya, North Africa, and the Middle East. They may be celebrating the end of the Gaddafi era, but can the new Libya hold together and flourish as a democracy? We'll hear from Senator John McCain, the British government, and the new Libyan government. We'll debate the future and the lessons for dealing with dictators. Plus, Gaddafi, the power of the image. We explore the iconography of dictatorship. And a major development in the story we broke last night about a police officer who remained undercover even in court. Now an independent investigation is launched. Good evening. Just a few years ago, Muammar Gaddafi seemed on top of the world. He had rebuilt relationships with the United States, Britain and others by appearing to cooperate in the war on terror. Buoyant oil prices kept the Libyan economy afloat, and at a gathering of African leaders, he was crowned King of Kings. Now, with the Gaddafi era over, the fractious tribal Libyan society he ruled for 42 years is having to come to terms with the end of the one thing that kept most of them united in recent months: opposition to Gaddafi himself. We'll hear in a moment some of the lessons for British foreign policy, but we begin tonight with our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban.
This evening, people flocked to what was once Green Square in Tripoli to celebrate the death of a hated dictator.
We got you, dead or alive, we got you, Gaddafi. خلاص 42 سنة شدناك. Libya now is freedom. Freedom, Libya. Everybody happy now.
The Gaddafi clan cast a long shadow over this nation. Their influence had been embedded over more than 40 years. Now the NTC, the National Transitional Council, can move ahead confidently, the blueprint for transition to democracy. Until today, the threat of a Gaddafi uprising against the new realities was still real. Now leaders across the Arab world are being told to take note of his undignified end.
For the region, today's events prove once more that the rule of an iron fist inevitably comes to an end. Across the Arab world, citizens have stood up to claim their rights. Youth are delivering a powerful rebuke to dictatorship. And those leaders who try to deny their human dignity will not succeed.
At about 8 Libyan time this morning, the forces besieging Sirte began their final assault on District 2, the coastal enclave still held by Gaddafi loyalists. NATO aircraft detected a group of vehicles forming up. A fighter bomber was directed onto the convoy as it drove off, hitting the vehicles. The transport scattered, and a little while later, NATO planes launched a second strike.
About 4 or 5 cars. It's in the morning. We shoot it in this side, you know, in the sea side.
Gaddafi seems to have survived that airstrike, hiding himself in a concrete culvert under the road. All around him, though, gun battles were raging as the revolutionary forces completed their capture of District 2. At 11, reports began to circulate that Sirte had indeed fallen. The last remaining Gaddafi fighters had either given up or been killed. The NTC announced that Mohamed Gaddafi, the former leader's son, had been taken. And then, just after 12, these extraordinary images were recorded, showing Muammar al-Gaddafi bloodied near the culvert where he'd taken refuge, and it seems he was still alive. Libya's new government said he was wounded and on his way to Misrata in an ambulance. But soon, other Libyan officials were briefing that the dictator had died. Then these graphic pictures of Gaddafi apparently dead came out. Finally, at 4:22, the news from Libya's Prime Minister confirming the former dictator's death.
When we confirm that all the evils, plus Gaddafi, have vanished from this beloved country, I think it's for the Libyans, to realize that this is a time to start a new Libya with a new economy, with a new education, with a new health system, with a new look to the future, A united Libya, one people and one future.
This photo and reports from the hospital tonight suggest that Gaddafi may have been finished off with a shot to the head after his capture. The NTC is talking about investigating it. Mutasim, his son, was also taken alive earlier today and shown in morgue pictures dead this evening. Fears have been expressed for months about warlordism or lawlessness gaining ground, and all of this leads the revolution's foreign backers to give polite but firm guidance about what they expect to happen next.
There is work to be done, of course, on stabilising Libya, on bringing together all the militias that have fought in the revolution under a single control of the transitional government. But that's the phase that will now begin, I think, very soon, the formation of that transitional government. Once the liberation of Libya is declared, and these events bring that much closer, then there's 30 days to form a transitional government, 8 months to have elections.
As celebrations continue, NATO suggests the air operation may finish within hours. Their campaign has been instrumental in the NTC's success, overthrowing and eliminating Gaddafi. Now they'll be watching in the hope that victory isn't squandered.
And Mark is with me now. Is it over?
I think for all intents and purposes, there are still 1 or 2 places where the pro-Gaddafi forces are said to be. But it does appear that this last holdout in Sirte was the place where pretty much all of the key Gaddafi loyalists had gone after the fall of Tripoli. This is why there was this intense fighting there over the past 2 weeks. And we know from other sources, for example, today, that the former defence minister was also killed today, that Musa Ibrahim, the spokesman who we saw a lot of during the early phase of this crisis, he's said to have been taken alive. Reports even that Saif al-Gaddafi, the senior son, was also killed today. We're not completely sure about all of those, but this pattern of them either being killed or captured or killed after capture seems to be pretty general of the senior leadership figures. There were rumours that 1 or 2 vehicles got away. It's just possible that some key person has got away, but this should be it now.
Do you have, as they begin this healing process, do you have any sense of what kind of Libya the Libyan people actually want or will settle for?
Well, of course, what they want is democracy. That's the refrain that's been heard again and again, and apparently seems to unite people from the Western-educated technocrats through to the people like Abdel Hakim Belhaj, the militia commander in Tripoli, who has a past on the extreme Islamist wing of politics and direct action. Now, the interesting thing is, how can these aspirations be woven together? Will the technocrats who form the bedrock of the NTC, the lawyers, the doctors, often people with a really good knowledge from foreign education of how democracy works, what it looks like, what it smells like, how will they be woven together with the tribal leaders? Will political forces emerge, parties or other mechanisms for binding together these different types of Libyan people and their aspirations?
Because however talented Libyans are, and they're talented in all places all across the world, there isn't really a political class, is there?
Well, there isn't. And the problem is, of course, in many ways, the 42 years of Gaddafi atomised society, eliminated or drove abroad people who showed real initiative, real political spark. The question now, I think, really is whether this technocratic element, and they're really vital and central to the NTC, will they just be moved aside as the tribal and other more traditional social leaders, Islamist leaders, really bring the vote out? Or will they continue to play a role and help give, if you like, that more westernised flavour to the democracy that is planned there?
Mark, thank you. Well, joining us now from Washington is the former Republican presidential candidate, Senator John McCain. Senator McCain, we saw Secretary of State Hillary Clinton say simply, "Wow," when she heard the news. I just wondered what you thought when you heard the news.
Well, I thought this is a beautiful day for democracy and a chance for freedom. And it's obviously the hard part is ahead in building democracy and all the institutions that go with it. And the country, as was just pointed out by your previous person that said that the institutions of democracy are difficult. It's a tribal society in many respects, and we have a long way to go. But could I just say, I'm grateful to the British government and people and the French for leading in this fight with NATO, and they were instrumental in bringing about this victory, and they deserve great credit, and I'm grateful.
Are you happy at the manner of his death? I mean, there's those who wanted him to stand trial. It does appear he was alive when he was captured, and then something happened, we don't know what.
Of course, I'm not happy about that. I would have liked to have seen him in the dock in Hague at the International Criminal Court, but I think it's a good thing that he is now removed from the scene. He has the blood of Americans and British on his hands, as well as his brutality towards the Libyan people. Could I just say, the first thing I think we need to do for the Libyans now is what the British government and now the American government, I hope, is pledging to do, and that's help care for the wounded. They have some 30,000 wounded, and they do not have the capabilities to care for them. I'd love to see American airplanes taking some of the wounded to our military hospital in Germany. I'd like to see an American hospital ship in Tripoli in the harbor there. I think we need to really help them with areas of the wounded that they have no capability. And then I think second, we've got to try, as your previous speaker mentioned, that we really need to get these militias under one army, national army, under the TNC. This is a very, very big challenge, and we've got to do that as quickly as possible. And finally, now we've got to help them with the building blocks of democracy. This country has never known democracy.
Now, there's a big task list there. I just wondered for Britain, for the United States, and for France, if there were lessons to be learned here too, given our experiences in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Was this a better way to handle things, to let Libyans do it and provide some support?
Well, I think they're very different situations. For example, and I know it's been discussed on your program, what do we do about Syria, which does not lend itself to the kind of military option that was there in Libya. So each situation is very different. But my great regret is we did not use the full weight of American air power, which we could have, which would have shortened the conflict. We could have declared a no-fly zone early on, and that would have ended it there. But I am very appreciative that our country and government stopped Gaddafi outside the gates of Benghazi when he was about to go in and slaughter people there. And I'm proud of the logistical and other support, significant support the United States provided, but I'm still disappointed we didn't use the full weight of our air power.
Senator, you said that every situation is different. Syria is very complicated, but do you think there are other dictators who should be less secure in their beds tonight because of what has happened today?
I think dictators all over the world, including Bashar Assad, maybe even Mr. Putin, and maybe some Chinese, maybe all of them, may be a little bit more nervous because clearly the people of Libya rose up. We assisted them, and if it hadn't have been for the British and French and NATO air power, they probably wouldn't have succeeded. But I think they ought to be nervous. I think it's the spring, not just the Arab Spring.
It's the spring. I just wanted to pick you up on that. It's the springtime in Russia, that might be not just a place where people vote, but a real democracy. Do you really think that?
I think it's very possible that you will see people protesting a government that is clearly one that is not democratic in the fashion that I think the Russian people had the hopes and aspirations for once the Soviet Union collapsed.
And just a final thought.
I cannot predict an armed uprising or anything like that, but I could certainly see significant protests in a lot of countries.
Okay, just a final thought. Has President Obama handled this quite well? I mean, we've seen in the past few months the death of Osama bin Laden, al-Awlaki, and now also Gaddafi.
Well, I think the administration deserves great credit for bin Laden, al-Awlaki, and now, but in Libya, I don't think we should have led from behind. I think we should have led from the front. And I think we could have prevented a lot of the wounded and killed that ensued because of the prolongation of the conflict, because of the failure to use the maximum United States air power, which we have some unique capabilities. But I am proud that we did provide a lot of the support and very, very important help and assistance in this effort.
Senator McCain, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, we can go over live to Tripoli now and hear from a senior member of the National Transitional Council, Mohamed Sia. Mr. Sia, we saw the pictures of Gaddafi wounded but alive. Was he deliberately executed by NTC soldiers?
Hi, how are you? First of all, I would like to just add one point to what Mr. McCain was saying concerning the democracy in Libya, that he says Libya never knew democracy. I would like to tell you and everybody that there was a very democratic kingdom in Libya before Gaddafi came, which is from 1952 to the days of Gaddafi.
But in this new democracy, just the specific point about the way that Gaddafi died, are you concerned that he was executed?
No, he was not. He was captured alive, that's true. But they were carrying him, they were taking him in an ambulance to a hospital in Misrata, where they have crossed a firing zone. There was crossfire between our mortars and Gaddafi killers. So a bullet, he was shot from one of the sides of his head, and no one can tell whether it was from the mortars or from his soldiers. No one can tell.
It does look as if he's got a bullet hole right in the middle of his forehead, but I wondered if you regret that he won't stand trial.
Well, yes, it would be it would have been much better if we took him through justice, and at least we gave chance to those people who lost their sons and to the crime that he done through the history, through these 42 years. But thank God now the universe is free of Gaddafi, this monster who did lots of bad things, not only to the Libyan, but to everybody on this universe.
Do you reminded us that there was a democracy before Gaddafi, as you suggested. How confident are you that the various people who came together to overthrow him will now work together to build this new Libya that you want?
I am sure, I am very confident that you will witness a rising of a great nation, the new Libya, the very democratic and civilized nation. And at this moment, I would like to thank every single American and all the British and French and Turkish and all nations did help us get rid of this nightmare.
And we can hear the gunfire in the background, which I assume is celebration. How do you feel tonight as a Libyan?
Well, I tell you, I am very happy. This moment, I think the best moment of my life, because I feel now we became free, we became human, we can build up our own nation without that dictator who destroyed every good thing in our nation.
And just a final thought. Senator McCain said you need still quite a lot of help. You need medical help. There are people who've got terrible wounds. Would you welcome that from the United States, from Britain, from other countries?
Of course, United States was a good help to us. They were a good ally, and we will never forget what they've done. All the NATO and the Arab states who did help us, and the Islamic states, we will never forget their help. And the other day, Ms. Clinton was here, and she promised that a big ship hospital will sail from the United States to Tripoli to help our wounded young men to be treated in Tripoli.
And briefly, if I may, have you got everybody you're looking for? I mean, where is Saif Gaddafi? Do you have all the people you're trying to catch?
Sorry? Can you repeat that again?
Where is Gaddafi's son, Saif Gaddafi?
I think he is, if he is not captured yet, he will be captured very soon, because he is somewhere in the south of Tripoli, nearby the mountain of Giryan and Bani Walid in Al-Aziziyah area. And I think he will be captured very soon.
Okay, Mohamed Sia,
remember just a second, I want only to tell you one thing. What President Reagan was telling Gaddafi, run but you can never hide. Even Saif al-Islam, he can run but he can never hide.
Okay.
We will catch him.
Mohamed Sia, thank you very much for joining us from Tripoli. Thank you. Well, now, one of the extraordinary things about Colonel Gaddafi was his ability to survive, at least until today. For years, he was associated with international terrorist movements and regarded as a significant enemy by Britain, the United States and many other countries. Then, he rehabilitated himself in the eyes of some, including Tony Blair, by giving up any idea of weapons of mass destruction and apparently helping in the war on terror. Tim Hugh now reports on the lessons of dealing with a dictator.
Mad, perhaps. Bad, certainly. Muammar Gaddafi appeared at times as a buffoon to many in the West and the wider Arab world. In Libya, he'll be remembered mainly for his cruelty.
He's a dictator, a tyrant, a wretched man, a man who had no problems, no hesitation in killing his people, if need be, should they oppose his rule or criticise him in any way, shape or form. I mean, from a distance, you can look at him as a clown. But when you're living underneath his rule, then it's not funny anymore.
The dashing young officer who overthrew the monarchy in 1969 in the name of Arab nationalism claimed later to have invented the purest form of democracy, a state of the masses, guided by his own idiosyncratic musings collected in the Green Book. In practice, it was an old-fashioned dictatorship.
One of the strange things to me at first was that all the Libyans I met would tell me that he'd been on the telephone to them the night before, and I thought at first that they were just pretending and showing off, but eventually I came to the conclusion that he really did intervene at every level all the time in the detailed running of the country.
The revolt that eventually overthrew him this year was sparked by protests by the families of victims of a massacre in this jail, Abu Salim, where about 1,200 inmates were killed in 1996. But Gaddafi also helped spread death and destruction abroad. He armed the IRA with Semtex explosive to make their bombs, boasting it was sent to make the British pay the price for their past misdeeds.
The existence of Britain in the north of Ireland is the sense of colonization, and these people fight to get rid of this colonization. It is just a fight, and we support it.
In 1984, a shot from inside the Libyan embassy in London, aimed at protesters outside, killed a British policewoman, Yvonne Fletcher. 5 years later, Libya was responsible for the blowing up of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, killing 270. By then, Libya had become an international pariah. Years of isolation only ended after Gaddafi's regime admitted its role in the bombing and paid compensation to the victims. It was Tony Blair's visit to the Colonel's desert tent in 2004, after Libya had given up its weapons of mass destruction programme, that sealed his readmission to the international community. Some thought it was an embrace too far.
The sight of Tony Blair hugging Gaddafi was sickening. I mean, even thinking back at it, I find it repulsive. This is a man who kills people, who has no problem in killing people, he has a history of killing people. And then all of a sudden, we're hugging him. It was disgusting, it was vile.
With the memory of past crimes still fresh in many minds, was it wrong to try to make a new start? Did Britain make a historic mistake in renewing ties with Gaddafi's regime a decade and a half after Yvonne Fletcher's murder, renewing relations that would gradually become closer and closer until this year the UK played a major part in helping rebels to overthrow him? And is it perhaps the same mistake we're making again with some of the Middle East's remaining strongmen? We maintain relations with Sudan, whose president, Omar al-Bashir, is wanted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. We have close and friendly ties with King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, whose absolute monarchy suppresses all dissent. Yemen's dictator, Ali Abdullah Saleh, has been supported by the West as a buttress against Islamist militancy. And Syria's Bashar al-Assad was given the benefit of the doubt for a long time this year as evidence mounted of the state's killing of protesters.
We can't turn a blind eye, for these governments will, at a time, they shall fall. As Gaddafi fell today, then other tyrants will also fall. And then we have to deal with the people of that country. And if we haven't stood by their side in their hour of need, they shall remember this.
But that's not a recipe for practical diplomacy.
And when you say we made a mistake with Gaddafi, did we make a mistake? I think we made a very bad situation slightly better or slightly less bad. I don't think we did make a mistake, as a matter of fact. There are certain policies one can worry about, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be working with regimes even when they are bad regimes, because, as I said before, the country continues to exist.
The man who ran Libya for more than 41 years is no more. His demise, thanks in part to Western efforts. But he's certainly not the last of his kind that we'll have to do business with.
Tim Hugh there. Well, earlier I spoke to the International Development Secretary, Andrew Mitchell. Do you think that there is a lesson here for British governments in how to deal with dictators, that you have to sup with a very, very long spoon?
Well, you do, but you also have to engage with them on human rights issues and also, of course, on national interest issues. But I think the lesson from what has happened in Libya is that a long spoon is right.
Do you think Tony Blair got too close? I mean, many people have said he was right to try to bring him back into the fold because of weapons of mass destruction and other things, but he may have got too close to him.
Well, I think he was right to try that, but the evidence now is clearly he was much too close towards the end of his time.
Does that mean that there are lessons then for how we should deal with other dictators or semi-dictators in other parts of the world, from Sudan to, well, Syria is another example, I suppose, Yemen and so on, that we should think very carefully about how we approach them?
Well, I think the analogy with Syria in this particular case is not a good one, because there was unanimity of view that Gaddafi had to be stopped from conducting a bloody massacre in Benghazi. But, I mean, it is
there are massacres in Syria, of course.
There are, but there was complete agreement across the Arab world that Gaddafi's time was up. Whereas I think there is disagreement between the different parts of the Arab world over Syria. And of course, for a long time, there's been disagreement on the Security Council in New York as well. So they're not analogous, I think.
Obviously, this is a huge moment for the people of Libya, most of whom have been celebrating today, and for the NTC. But the glue that kept the NTC together so far has been hatred of Gaddafi. Do you worry that because that has gone, although there's a lot of hope for the future, it might not actually translate to the kind of democratic state that you'd like to see?
Well, I think part of the glue that kept the NTC together was the fact that they were truly national and that they were transitional, as well as having a common enemy in Gaddafi and a desire to get their country back again. But I think that everything I saw when I visited the NTC in Benghazi earlier on in the conflict suggests that they are absolutely determined to offer a new start to the people of Libya, to have a genuine process leading to elections in about 8 months' time, and to rebuild their country. And from what I saw in the work we were doing, for example, on stabilisation and humanitarian relief, there is both a capacity and a real ability and wish to do this.
Now, you made a distinction, said Syria is a very different case, but I just wondered if there was at least a model for British foreign policy in the future. I mean, we've seen what's happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. This was a very different kind of conflict. No boots on the ground. Do you think that's something that future British governments should think about when considering this kind of thing?
All these situations are different. But I think in Libya, our intervention was right, it was necessary, it was legal, it was all done very carefully. I think that the leadership provided by the Prime Minister and also by President Sarkozy will go down long after this is all over as absolutely critical in saving the lives of thousands of people who would otherwise have been massacred.
One issue that the Prime Minister raised today was Lockerbie. He mentioned the victims of Lockerbie and the IRA and so on. Do you think we'll ever get to the truth of what happened at Lockerbie? I mean, is there a lot more to come out? And if so, would you publish it?
Well, I hope we will get to the truth, and the Prime Minister was clear that all the indications from Tripoli, from the new regime, are that they want to cooperate and they want to help, not least on PC Yvonne Fletcher, whose vile murder on the streets of London has still not properly been resolved. So I think on all these things there's huge goodwill towards Britain for the work that we have done, and quite clear support for trying to bring these matters to a proper conclusion.
Are you surprised that al-Megrahi has outlived Gaddafi?
I'm surprised, given what we were told by the last government and indeed by the Scottish executive, but I think his life is drawing to a close.
Andrew Mitchell, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, now for some sense of the significance of today's events and where it leaves the Arab Spring as we go into autumn. I'm joined by the Conservative MP Rory Stewart and Nabila Ramdani, who's a French-Algerian writer, and from Washington by David Gordon, formerly with the US State Department. David Gordon, just on that point of your sense of this moment in history, how big a deal is this, do you think?
Well, I think it's a quite big deal. Obviously, it's a very big deal for Libya. And I'm actually of the view that it's probably a good thing for Libya that Gaddafi is dead and that there's not a trial. I actually think that trials, the trial of Saddam Hussein, the trial of Mubarak, actually don't help to bring the country together. I think that the death of Gaddafi, coincident with the fall of Sirte, really gives the potential to have a dramatic end to the conflict period here and move on to what will be a very challenging stage, but one that holds a lot of promise, that of rebuilding Libya and creating a new regime here, a new, more democratic dispensation. For the rest of the region...
I just want to bring in Nabila Ramdani on that point. I mean, do you regret there's not going to be a trial? Are you worried about the circumstances of his death? Do you think people will actually care all that much now that he's gone?
I think ideally you clearly want to see, justice, the rule of law and due process apply to anyone, including, a murderous tyrant like Gaddafi. But I have to say that his death took place in the context of a savage civil war. I'm afraid to say it was almost inevitable that he was going to end up that way, given the amount of hatred that he managed to build up throughout the decades where he ruled with an iron fist. And, he, at the end of the day, created a very barbaric society. And it's that very barbaric society which killed him.
Rory, you were listening to Senator John McCain a few moments ago, and he said there are dictators all around the world, including, he pointed out, the leadership in China and Russia should pay attention to this because they can be overthrown. I mean, what did you make of that? Did he overstep it, or is he going to point?
I disagree with Senator McCain. I think it's very dangerous to try to draw those connections. I don't think Putin or China are going to be sleeping uneasily in their bed because of this. I think it's basically a Middle Eastern, North African phenomenon, and I think one of the dangers is thinking, as John McCain seemed to imply, that we've found some universal model and that this is the beginning of what he calls a new spring for the world. I think that's very dangerous talk.
David Gordon, I don't know if you heard Senator McCain say that, but he was suggesting it's a new spring for the world. I mean, what do you make of that? Do you think he's right or wrong?
Yeah, no, I basically agree with Rory. I mean, I think that this is very significant in the region, but the significance I would put primarily in two states. I think that Syria is now at considerable risk, and President Assad is at considerable risk of seeing his regime, I think, begin to unravel somewhat more quickly. And I think behind that, especially if Assad goes, then the regime in Iran could really see, I think, an uptick in political opposition. But I think Rory is right. The notion that this spreads to China, to Russia, is just very far-fetched at this point.
One of the things that we've been dealing with all night is this question of lessons for whom, including lessons perhaps for Britain, France, the United States, and so on, about intervention, what works and what doesn't work. How do you think this has actually been seen through the Arab world, given that there was a big consensus, Arab League and so on, that something should be done to protect Benghazi?
Well, I think clearly the victory of British foreign policy and indeed French foreign policy will perhaps, buoy up those governments to think their foreign policy in a new way, meaning that they will perhaps value military interventions in the future, just like Tony Blair did after his success in Kosovo. He valued military action elsewhere, and he pursued it in Sierra Leone, Afghanistan, and indeed finally in Iraq. So it might be that Western governments, including Britain, might feel brave enough to take on new countries.
Do you think that's a good thing? I mean, I'm sure Rory's going to disagree with this because I know his views. But I mean, we heard about Iran, the possibility of more protests in Iran. We know what a mess Syria's in. I don't see any appetite in the Western powers to get involved in the same way as they did in Libya. Do you?
Well, clearly, for Western powers, Libya was a far better was a safer bet. Sorry, it doesn't have the regional implication that Syria, for example, has. Gaddafi was a friendless dictator. He doesn't have the regional, powerful regional allies that Syria has that can pose a threat to the world and indeed to the region. And a final point, dare I say, Libya offers very attractive prospects in terms of oil and natural gas, which will make the military adventures absolutely worthwhile.
I think the other key lesson is that Libya did seem to have regional support. It had UN support. And although that doesn't go to the moral rights or wrongs of it, it's absolutely crucial for whether we can really do these things. If you go into a country like Syria where the UN support is very flaky, where the regional support isn't there, you're in a very, very dangerous situation.
What have we learned about that? Do you think? I mean, liberal interventionism has peaked, or is that it, or will we see more of the same?
I hope what we've learned from this is firstly that every condition is different, but secondly, no boots on the ground, strong regional support, strong UN support. You've got to hope, but you've got to be very patient. We had an almost stalemate for 6 months. You've got to hold your nerve. I completely disagree with this McCain idea that we should have gone in hard from the beginning, shown off the full extent of American air power. What I really felt when I was in Tripoli is that this had worked best because Libyans felt it was their thing. They felt it was like Egypt, they felt it was like Tunisia, they felt they owned it, and that's why they were celebrating the square in the way we never saw people celebrate in Baghdad or Kabul.
David Gordon, obviously President Obama welcomed this, but when you travel around the United States, do you not get a sense that actually Americans don't want to do abroad? They've had enough and they want to concentrate at home.
Yeah, no, I think that's very much the case. I think that there frankly are very few broadly generalizable lessons from Libya, particularly on the military side. I think that you had the extraordinary circumstance here of Colonel Gaddafi having totally infuriated all of the other countries in the region to the point where the Arab League requested a military intervention by NATO. That's not going to happen anywhere else. It's not going to happen in Syria, but it's literally, we're never going to see that again. So I think the notion that this is going to lead to a greater sympathy and a greater orientation towards military instruments to do this kind of thing by Western powers is really not the case. In the United States, I think the interesting thing here is as you look at even the very, very conservative Republican presidential aspirants, none of them are calling for staying the course in Afghanistan.
Okay.
Now that we've killed bin Laden and seeing the just enormous difficulties of cooperation with Pakistan, I think that the U.S. is leading towards a much lower military footprint here abroad,
David,
as we head into a period where we work towards re-energizing things at home.
Okay, thank you all very much. Now, we'll have more on Colonel Gaddafi in a moment. First, some news about Newsnight next week. The world's population looks set to pass the 7 billion mark. In a series of films on food security, we'll be asking how do we continue to feed the world when there are so many people in it? In parts of the planet, a growing middle class consumes ever more resources, while in poorer regions, more people are starving than ever before. Fergal Keane begins our week of special reports in Africa.
In an age of food crisis, we'll be reporting from Africa on the promise of an agricultural revolution.
Africa will become a net exporter of food.
People are dispossessing the poor people of their land.
Youth who are not working anywhere, who are suffering.
We'll investigate the challenge faced by some of the world's poorest people as famine grips vast swathes of the continent.
Our first report comes from Zambia, where a revolution is taking place on the land.
Can these become fields of plenty?
Okay, you can see those reports next week. Now, the Metropolitan Police has called in the Independent Police Complaints Commission after our story last night exposed the work of an undercover police officer who gave false information under oath in a criminal trial. He'd infiltrated a campaign group in a case lawyers say raises questions about the integrity of the criminal justice system. Richard Watson, who broke the story, is here. Tell us about it, Richard.
Yeah, well, the Met Police issued a statement tonight, and they seem to be giving themselves one degree of freedom, saying they've contacted the IPCC with a view to making a formal referral to them tomorrow. But they confirm this follows consideration today of the allegations we raised last night along with The Guardian. So I think crucially, though, central to this issue is how many other cases are there. And it's interesting they use the word relating to historic covert police deployments, raising the possibility there may be more than one. But crucially, at the centre of all this is the relationship between Jim Boyling and the Metropolitan Police handlers, and I've been trying to investigate these matters today. Our story about undercover cop Jim Boyling is toxic for the Metropolitan Police, especially if it turns out that senior officers authorised him to give false evidence in court to avoid his cover being blown.
If someone's given a false name under oath in court, in my book that's perjury. That's whether you're a police officer, a politician, a journalist or an ordinary member of the public.
Do the ends justify the means? And clearly, in this recent case and in other publicised cases, I would most definitely say they do not.
Beginning in 1995, Jim Boyling used an alias while taking part in protests like this, organised by the group Reclaim the Streets. 2 years later, he maintained his new identity while appearing in court for disorderly behaviour at a protest in the offices of London Transport. In 1999, Boyling began a relationship with a fellow activist he went on to marry. This year, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary began an investigation into undercover policing, and its report has been delayed as a result of Newsnight's revelations. Is it really credible that Jim Boyling was acting on his own, or were there some systems inside the Met Police which authorised his behaviour to take part in the criminal justice system right up to and including the trial where he gave false evidence? Maintaining his cover story, Jim Boyling attended pre-trial legal meetings with other activist friends who'd been charged with public order offences. His solicitor told Newsnight yesterday this was a perversion of the legal process. Surely someone at the Met must have known what was going on.
There are many questions to be asked about those cover officers. What did they do? You know, a cover officer should be in daily contact with his undercover operative. The management should want to get in front of that undercover operative every week, look into his eyes.
If his cover officers did know, then did they tell senior leaders at the Met? Well, the police are facing tough questions on this too. I've seen documents which show that the Met Police were holding an internal investigation into Jim Boyling, and it started in January of this year. It's still active, so it's been going on now for 10 months. The key question is whether that investigation found evidence that Jim Boyling was using his cover name, Jim Sutton, in a criminal trial. And if they did find that evidence, why they did not share it with the police inspectorate. The question of proportionality is central to the HMIC report, which was due to be released today. Is it appropriate to use undercover officers to penetrate environmental movements? Currently, the police are left to make these judgments themselves, though their decisions are now checked internally and externally retrospectively.
Privacy protection in Britain has grown up in a very ad hoc and piecemeal way. You need a magistrate's warrant normally before you can search someone's home or their office. You need a politician's warrant before you can tap their phone. But when you are putting people undercover, pretending to be their friend, pretending to be their comrade or their colleague, the police can basically sign this off in-house. And that's just not good enough to establish trust in modern Britain.
These are important policy issues which will be considered when the delayed HMIC report into undercover policing is published. But for now, there are rather more pressing matters for the Met, such as the prospect of an IPCC investigation or even criminal proceedings against some of its own. So, Gavin, I mean, I've learned a little bit more about the shenanigans between the Metropolitan Police and Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary today. I mean, the crucial issue is what the Met told HMIC. My understanding is the Met didn't tell the HMIC about this internal disciplinary investigation that was going on into Jim Bowling, and I think that will be one of the big questions that the HMIC and others will want to get to the bottom of.
OK, Richard, thanks very much. More now on our main story. Over the past 42 years, Colonel Gaddafi has been one of the most striking world figures, along with Fidel Castro, Yasser Arafat and a few others. His face, his bizarre style made him a peculiar kind of political icon. Stephen Smith reports now on the iconography of a dictator.
The Colonel, mysteriously he never promoted himself above Colonel, was a bogeyman to the international community. But love him or hate him, and how long do you need for that one, you certainly couldn't ignore him. He was a mixture of the terrible and the eye-popping, a tyrant wardrobed by Lady Gaga. The desert can be an unforgiving environment for male grooming, and it takes a particular stripe of man to carry off a whole look. Think of Lawrence of Arabia, the classic French foreign legionnaire. There was General Rommel, in his own way, and more recently, Colonel Gaddafi.
Where he was completely over the top, hugely distinguished, was what in his own get-ups. Now, his own get-ups were special, were madder than mad. It was a sort of combination of Liberace and Michael Jackson and a whole lot of crazy cartoon figures. And the older he got, the crazier those get-ups looked, as if he'd watched Hollywood films, or maybe his dressers had watched Hollywood films. So there's one with him as a sort of fur hat and a sort of trapper leather jacket.
It wasn't only Gaddafi's outfits that occasioned surprise. It's said he had the temerity to break wind in front of the BBC's World Affairs editor. And it was reported he entrusted his personal safety to a phalanx of female bodyguards. Some claim to see evidence of enlightened attitudes in Gaddafi's promotion of women.
Gaddafi's view on women was something that I think stemmed from his own personal need and desire to stand out and to be unique amongst other Arab leaders. And he viewed himself as somebody who had liberated himself from sort of the backwardness of the East. And through that, he wanted to show that he was kind of the new empowerer of women without necessarily resorting to modern Western feminism.
The point about dictator style, clothes and interiors and everything else, is bigging yourself up. You may start as a man, but you want to end up as a god. Think French, because French style, the French style of furniture and decoration, is the style of plutocrats and despots for the last 150 years. Policy wonks don't think it matters because they don't understand it and they think this stuff is trivial. But as Oscar Wilde said, you know, only a fool doesn't judge by appearances. And the extraordinary appearance of, say, a dictator's interior tells you that here is paranoia and insecurity on a massive scale, the wish to intimidate and impress on a massive scale, and that there is danger and dodginess in that.
But at one time, at least, there was method in the madness, a point to all that showmanship. It was marking out Gaddafi's Libya as different, a Bedouin revolution. At times it seemed as if there was a whole caravan of Gaddafis, each one more exotically garbed than the last. And even after his downfall, the deconstruction may go on for some time yet.
Stephen Smith there. Well, no time for the papers. Frankly, they all have the same story as us anyway. That's all for Newsnight tonight. Emily is back tomorrow at the same time. Good night.
Hello there. Much more cloud across the country tonight compared to last night, which means it won't be anything like as cold first thing in the morning. It does make for a rather grey start, however, but it should tend to brighten up across central and eastern areas in particular. There will be some sunshine. A little bit of light rain is possible at times across the far north of England, but for most of England and Wales, it should be a dry day. And eventually, we will get a bit of sunshine coming through, which will lift the temperatures a bit higher than Thursday's values, eventually peaking in the low to mid-teens. The breeze will be picking up though, and it's coming in from the southwest, bringing the moisture off the Atlantic, and parts of southwest England and much of West Wales will stay quite grey with that cloud throughout the day. To the north and east of the hills, well, we may get some breaks in the cloud and a little bit of sunshine. Things may brighten up across the east of Northern Ireland, but overall a cloudy day here. Some rain early on, that tends to drift away to the north. Could be quite a soggy day though for parts of western and central Scotland. Along the Moray Firth, however, things could brighten up and that could lift the temperatures. Saturday, we'll see further rain in western Scotland and across Northern Ireland. Across much of England and Wales, however, Saturday is another dry day. We'll probably see a little bit more in the way of sunshine, but the breeze, again, will be picking up, so it might not feel as warm as those temperatures would suggest. There's that rain for western Scotland and Northern Ireland on Saturday. It may edge into the west of England and Wales later in the day, but for many central and eastern areas, it will be sunny but breezy. However, the strongest winds look like developing during the course of Sunday. There are, of course, more weekend weather details online.